The book of Daniel is widely known for its dreams, its visions, and its prophecies. And it's often used in attempt to determine the timing of the end times and even the identity of an antichrist. And chapter 7 of Daniel is no different. In fact, it's probably one of the most commented on and speculated upon passages in the book of Daniel. And it's here that Daniel is given a dream, a night vision of 4 beasts that rise up out of the sea. And they're all great and terrifying, but the 4th one, the final one, is by far the worst. And it has 10 horns, and we are given the detail that it has one little horn that rises up that has eyes like a man and a mouth that speaks great things. And so this is where the speculation comes in. This is where the questions come in. What are these beasts? What do they represent? Who is this little horn? And what does that mean for us? What does that mean for our future? And so in order to answer these questions, we're going to read the passage and then go beast by beast in succession in order to identify them. And then we will finish up with the identity of this little horn. Who or what is this little horn? We read here Daniel's vision. He said, "I saw in my vision by night, behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great seas, and 4 great beasts came up out of the sea, and they were different from one another. The first was like a lion, but it has eagle's wings. And then as I looked, its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and the mind of a man was given to it. And behold, another beast, a second one, like a bear. It was raised up on one side, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, and it was told, Arise, devour much flesh. After this I looked, and behold, another, a third beast, like a leopard, with 4 wings on its back, and the beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. And then after this, I saw in my night visions a 4th beast, terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth, which I think is a significant detail. It devoured and broke in pieces, and it stamped what was left with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. And Daniel says, I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another horn, a little one, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. Daniel is given this dream that is obviously highly symbolic. These beasts are representing something. This horn is representing something. And honestly, it's very similar to what John sees in the book of Revelation. It's in Revelation 13 that he sees beasts that come up out of the sea. And so that imagery is first given and used here by Daniel. And we read in verse 17 that these beasts, they actually represent different kings, the heads of different kingdoms that will rise up out of the earth. And I think that what we see here is a parallel to another dream, another vision that is given already in Daniel 2, where Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, has a dream of a statue that has a head of gold, and then it goes silver, bronze, iron. And we see in this dream that they represent 4 sequential, successive earthly empires, and they end with the coming of the kingdom of Jesus Christ. I think that we see a parallel here with the same 4 empires. We are just seeing them in a different light. We are seeing them from a different perspective. From Nebuchadnezzar's dream, we see them from man's eyes. They're precious metals. They're great and they're grand. They're impressive in the eyes of man. But here, the veil is removed, and we are getting to see the spiritual reality that is behind these 4 kingdoms. They're not so great in God's eyes. In fact, they're beastly. They're brutal, and we could even say that they are blasphemous. And so what we're going to do now is just go through each of these beasts and determine what they represent. The first beast is the lion with eagle's wings, and this is commonly understood, and I happen to agree with this, that it represents Babylon. I think it's a parallel to the head of gold. It's the empire in which Daniel was living in while he was given this dream. And I think if we look at biblical context as well as historical context, this really makes a lot of sense. In Jeremiah chapter 4, Babylon is portrayed as a lion. It's prophesied that this lion would come and devour and take really God's people into captivity. And this was literally fulfilled in the kingdom, in the empire of Babylon. In Ezekiel 17, there's a picture of an eagle, which again would have been speaking of Babylon. And so the images of the lion and the eagle, we have biblical precedent to understand that this would be referring to the ancient empire of Babylon. And then historically speaking, Babylon often used the lion in portrayals in its art and its architecture. There's a very famous statue that's known as the Lion of Babylon, and then a famous piece of their architecture on one of their walls, which is known as the Gate of Ishtar, honoring one of their pagan gods. It had a lion on it. So lions were all over the Babylonian Empire. And I think that Daniel would have readily recognized and registered that this beast was a picture of the empire in which he was living in. And the details of this lion, where the wings are plucked from it, its glory is taken from it, Daniel would have seen with his own eyes with the man, Nebuchadnezzar, who was the head of Babylon. As in Daniel 4, God humbled him. God drove him to behave like an animal. He actually got down and crawled around on all fours and ate and acted and behaved as though he was a beast, as though he was an animal. But then God restored him. God gave him back the mind of a man, which is portrayed in this dream of this beast. The lion is raised up and given the mind of a man. And this literally was fulfilled when Nebuchadnezzar was restored by God, and he actually acknowledged the God of heaven. That's the first beast. The second beast in sequence is like a bear, Daniel says. This is best understood as the empire, I believe, of Media and Persia, which would have succeeded Babylon, again in parallel with Nebuchadnezzar's dream of the chest and arms of silver. It's dual in nature. In Daniel 8, there's another vision of a ram with two horns, and they represent Media and Persia, and one of the horns is greater and bigger than the other. This here is a parallel with this beast that's like a lion, that one side is raised up, one side is greater than the other. This is understood as Persia, which was the more dominant half of the empire. And what I want us to see here is that God raised up Babylon for a time and a purpose, to bring judgment on Israel, to lead the people into captivity. But then God raised up Media and Persia, and he overthrew Babylon. And in Ezra 1, we read of a decree that Cyrus, the king of Persia, he gives, and he says that the Israelites are going to be able to go back and rebuild Jerusalem. And so we clearly see that God is using this sequence of beastly empires. Even though they may not honor him, he is able to use them. He is behind human history, and he is accomplishing his purpose and his will, even through unexpected people and even in unexpected places. The third beast is like a leopard with 4 wings, and it has 4 heads. This again fits very well with the third in the sequence of these 4 kingdoms, which would have been Greece, which rose to prominence rather swiftly under Alexander the Great. The leopard is a quicker and more agile animal than the previous 2 animals that represent the previous 2 empires. But this one has 4 heads and 4 wings. Alexander the Great famously did not have a successor, and so he left his kingdom to his 4 generals, clearly fulfilling the 4-headed nature that is symbolized with this third beast. But then the fourth beast is this 4th kingdom that gets more attention and more consideration from Daniel because it's different from the previous 3. We are told that it's more terrifying. it's more dreadful, and it's exceedingly strong. And so Daniel doesn't even depict it like a known animal. The other one's the lion, like a bear, like a leopard. This one, he doesn't even compare it to a known animal. He just gives us the details of how frightening it is. It has 10 horns, and it has teeth like iron, which I think is a very significant detail in understanding this fourth kingdom, because again, I see a parallel with the legs of iron and the feet of iron and clay, which represented the fourth kingdom in Daniel 2. If we're taking these in parallel, which I think we should, this would be the Roman Empire, which was greater and stronger than the previous three. We read in verse 19, there's an added detail that it has claws like bronze, showing that this empire absorbs and even builds upon the previous empires, which, if we are looking for literal fulfillment, I believe this literally happened as Rome took on a lot of the culture, a lot of the characteristics, even the religion, and maybe most notably the language of Greece, which is, our New Testament was written during the reign of the Roman Empire, but in the language of Koine Greek. So many of the characteristics are just expanded and magnified with this fourth beast. I think that we can see clear parallels and fulfillments in order to identify this fourth beast as the Roman Empire. But it's with the details of the 10 horns, and then really most significantly the little horn, where most of the confusion and really the speculation kind of comes in, because a lot of modern interpreters, they see this as a future political leader, really as an antichrist. And I have a problem with it, not so much that this kingdom is representing an anti-God or anti-Christ type of empire or even ruler. I have a problem with the timing, because I think that it seems pretty clear that these kingdoms are coming in sequence. It starts with Babylon. In Daniel 2 is the head of gold, and it works its way to Rome, in which the kingdom of Christ came literally right on time in the middle of the Roman Empire. I think we see a parallel here, beginning with Babylon, working its way to this horrible, beastly empire that was the Roman Empire, and it's at this time that Christ came. And so if we're taking these as parallels, and I think we should, this is really describing the time of Daniel all the way to the coming of Christ. And that's actually where the focus is, on Christ and his kingdom. And so I don't want to miss the forest for the trees here in Daniel 7. I don't want to miss the big picture for getting caught up in the little details. And it's not that the little details don't matter, because they do, but certainly the big picture, the overarching message also matters. And the overarching message is this, that there is going to be 4 great world empires, these earthly kingdoms that are like beasts, that precede and are ended by the coming kingdom of Christ. That's the timeline that we are clearly given in Daniel 2 with the coming kingdom of Christ, and then the parallel here with these 4 successive sequential beastly kingdoms that Daniel is seeing these visions of these beasts, but then all of a sudden in verse 9, it cuts to a vision of the Ancient of Days, God Almighty, and he is sitting ready to judge these beasts. And then in verse 11, it tells us that he does. This fourth beast and its little horn, it's destroyed and brought to an end by God. And it's in verse 13 that he sees this vision of one like a son of man who comes on the clouds of heaven. He's presented before the Ancient of Days, and he's given dominion, glory, and a kingdom, so that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. And we are told that his dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom is one that shall not be destroyed. So we are given the same type of message through both visions, just with parallel descriptions. One with precious metals and the stone coming, and then here with these beastly kingdoms, and then the Son of Man ascending up to the Ancient of Days. And this is famously how Jesus most often referred to himself. This was Jesus' favorite way to refer to himself. He would call himself the Son of Man. And the Jews around him, they knew what he was speaking about. In Matthew 26:64, it's where Jesus is really on trial and being interrogated by the Jewish council. The high priest, Caiaphas, says to him, "I adjure you by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, if you are the Son of God." And Jesus responds to him and he says, "You have said so, and from now on," that's the time frame that Jesus gives, "from now on, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." Now, Caiaphas clearly knew what Jesus was saying. He was referencing back to that vision in Daniel 7 and saying, "I am that Son of Man. I am the man who is ascending up to God and given power and glory and a kingdom that will be forever." Caiaphas knows what he's talking about, because Caiaphas then he tears his robes and he says, "What further evidence do you need? You've heard the blasphemy." He clearly recognized that Jesus was claiming to be the Son of Man who received glory, honor, dominion, and worship. And again, the time frame that Jesus gives is he says, "from now on." And so this was fulfilled and established, his kingdom inaugurated by his coming, his death, his resurrection, and then his ascension up to God, his ascension up to the Ancient of Days. And mind you, this is exactly what Peter confirms when he is preaching on the day of Pentecost in Acts 2, because it's here that he says that this Jesus, God raised him up, that he has been exalted to the right hand of God. And he even quotes Psalm 110:1, where he says that the Lord has ascended and sat down at the right hand, where he will reign until all of his enemies are made his footstool. So Jesus is this Son of Man who ascended and received dominion, glory, and a kingdom. So this dream in Daniel 7 is ultimately pointing to Christ. He is the main character here, not an antichrist, but Christ himself. It's ultimately pointing to his resurrection, his ascension, his exaltation to the right hand, where he would put an end to these beastly empires, of which Rome, the fourth beast, was the worst, the most terrifying, the most dreadful, exceedingly strong. And it was, of course, in the middle of Rome that Jesus was crucified. It was Rome that killed the Son of God. Well, we read of the end of this beastly empire in verses 26 and 27, where its dominion is taken away. It would be consumed and destroyed, and the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven would be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, so the people of God, and his kingdom would be an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions should serve and obey him. This is the focus of the prophecy. This is ultimately what the prophecy is about and what it's pointing to. But some of you might still be asking or wondering to yourself, but what do we do with the little horn? Well, a lot of people understand the little horn to be identified as Antiochus Epiphanes, who was a major persecutor against the Jews, a major blasphemer against God. He himself claimed to be God. But I have two main problems with this understanding. And the first is that he predates the Roman Empire. And I do believe that it's identified here, this fourth beast is the Roman Empire. In verse 21, the detail is that this figure, this little horn, would make war with the saints and would prevail over them. And so I think that this fits better within the context of the church, the saints of God, in the first century, as they lived in the Roman Empire. And it was during this time, under the reign of, for example, Nero, where there was a lot of widespread persecution against the saints, against the Christians, the people of God. Tacitus, which gives us a lot of valuable Roman history from the first century, records during this time major Christian persecution. where Christians were actually being burned alive. Many of them were being crucified. They were being fed to beasts in public arenas. And really, I think it's also interesting that Nero died in AD 68, and that kicked off this year that was known as the Year of the Four Emperors, because all of the unrest and fighting that was going on in the middle of the Roman Empire. Nero, who very famously persecuted the Christians, his death preceded then this year of rapid succession between three different emperors. So really could be fulfilling the three horns being uprooted. Another option is Titus, who was the Roman general that actually went in and desecrated the temple in Jerusalem in AD 70. He did horrible acts within the temple. He actually even claimed to have slain God in his own house, and he eventually became emperor. And it kind of depends on where you start counting, but if you start with Augustus as the first emperor of Rome, which is widely accepted, then Titus would have been 10th in succession. If you start with Julius Caesar, then he would have been the 11th. Really, either way, people could see that as fulfilling the 10 horns. But I don't want to get too caught up in speculation here and start missing what I believe is the focus of this passage, which is the coming kingdom of Jesus Christ. I just wanted to show you that there is reasonable historic fulfillment that people can point to and understand that this doesn't have to be a future political leader that so many people point to and say that it's a future Antichrist. Now, whether people want to argue that or not, that's not my main concern here. My main concern is for us to see that this timeline matches the timeline of Daniel 2, the sequence of four kingdoms that would rise and fall, and historically they did. They would end with the coming of Christ, the establishment of his kingdom, his ascension as the Son of Man, where he will reign until all of his enemies are made his footstool. Jesus Christ is right now the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. Well, if you didn't catch it already, here is my video explaining Daniel 2. Here's a playlist of all of my eschatology videos so far. And if you haven't already, subscribe, stay tuned, because next week we're going to cover Daniel 9, the infamous 70 weeks.